Hello, everybody. My name is Donnie Westfall. I am a technical specialist with the Clean Buildings team. And thanks for joining us today. We'll be going over Clean Buildings Performance Standard Tier 1 requirements, and then touching on some updates that have come about over the last couple of years. Next slide. So this slide represents our agency's purpose. Commerce touches every aspect of community and economic development, from serving communities by providing grants for homeless programs or small businesses, building infrastructure and growing the economy, to promoting public safety. Commerce strengthens communities. Next slide. So this is just a brief overview of our Clean Buildings team. We've grown significantly over the last year. Our team is dedicated to providing timely, actionable, and clear information about the Clean Buildings Standard. So you'll see my name there under the technical team. Again, thanks for joining today. Next slide. Here is our agenda. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to do just kind of a recap of Tier 1 requirements, looking at roles and responsibilities, schedule, compliance paths and requirements, touching on exemptions, penalties, and then going over a little bit high level of the incentive program. After that, we're going to kind of look at some of the changes that came about through Tier 2 rulemaking when we had an opportunity to make some amendments to the initial standard. So we're going to look at some updated terms. We'll look at a couple additions and modifications that were made through that process. Then we'll have time for some questions and answers, and then a few support and resources slides, and then just some information on upcoming events. Okay. So going back, buildings have a profound impact on the environment. Building sector is the state's second largest carbon polluter behind transportation. Greenhouse gas emissions from buildings jumped significantly from 1990 to 2015. This slide is from 2015, an update as of 2019. Buildings emissions are around 25%. So existing buildings create unique challenges and opportunities as the state works to meet its greenhouse gas limits by 2030, 2040, and 2050. Investment in building energy efficiency is the most cost-effective way to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Washington State Legislature recognizes that it's in the state's interest to maximize the full potential of energy efficiency standards, incentives, programs, and codes to keep both energy costs low and to meet those greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals. Next slide. As a result, the Clean Buildings Law was authorized in House Bill 1257 in the 2019 legislative session. So the standard is based on ASHRAE Standard 100, which covers energy efficiency in existing buildings. And Commerce developed amendments to the standard to conform with the legislation. So these amendments can be found under WAC 194-50. You can also find an integrated document developed by ASHRAE that incorporates all the state amendments into Standard 100, and that can be found on our website. There's a free download, and I don't know, Judy, if you can put a link in there. Most of you probably have a copy of that already, but so the requirement applies to buildings over 50,000 square feet, and we will discuss this in more detail as we move through today's presentation. So the law charged Commerce with rulemaking, notifying building owners, administering incentives, and supporting mandatory compliance. Next slide. So this slide is it's kind of an outline of the legislative and rulemaking activities that Commerce has been doing over the past 5 years, beginning in 2019 with the legislature passing House Bill 1257. Then the bill expanded to buildings between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, including multifamily. This is known as Tier 2 of the standard. And rulemaking for that concluded in 2023, 2024. And then this year we conducted rulemaking on House Bill 1390, which was in regards to decarbonization of district energy systems. So we recently concluded the workshop series and have scheduled a public hearing for the rulemaking on June 4th. All right. Now, we're getting back into Tier 1 requirements. So we'll go and just kind of review all the requirements for Tier 1 buildings. Next slide. So this is a breakdown of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard by section and normative annexes. The latest version is dated February of 2024, and this incorporates the amendments and changes I've mentioned that we made through Tier 2 rulemaking. So if you don't have the latest version of this standard, I recommend downloading this copy. Sorry about that. Commerce goes through rulemaking. We make amendments to these existing sections and add new sections as necessary. So at the end of 2023, we completed the Tier 2 rulemaking, as I mentioned. So in addition to adding or modifying sections 1 through 9 here, we also added normative Annex Y, which is specific to Tier 2 administrative procedures. And Annalyn Bergen will be presenting on Tier 2 requirements tomorrow in the webinar. The current rulemaking we are wrapping up is, as also mentioned, decarbonization of campus district energy systems. Once those rules are finalized, a revised integrated document accounting for the district energy system requirements will be published. So look forward to that as well. All right. So what is a Tier 1 building? As most folks here know by now, Tier 1 buildings are buildings where the sum of non-residential hotel, motel, and dormitory floor areas exceed 50,000 gross square feet, excluding the parking garage area. And this includes building complexes. Complex is a group of buildings interconnected by conditioned spaces on contiguous property. Annalyn, if you could hit the slide one more time. There we go. All right. Next slide, please. So here's a look at some of the key roles that are outlined within the standard and a few of the responsibilities associated with each of these roles. So these roles are all defined within the standard. The energy manager does not have any specific credentials, but the qualified person and qualified energy auditors do. And we'll touch on those credentials a little bit later in the webinar as they've been slightly modified through the Tier 2 rulemaking process. The qualified person, these are kind of the important roles that they play within the standard. One of them is just overviewing the entire application process and signing off on the application in Form A and developing the targets. The qualified energy auditor, as it sounds, is one that would perform an ASHRAE Level 2 audit if pursuing compliance with the investment criteria and verifying commissioning reports and making sure that energy savings are met. And then the energy manager is really that person that's works with the building, understands the energy efficiency and the performance of the building, develops the energy management plan, and just verifies and tracks performance of the building throughout its life. Okay, next slide. So this is a compliance schedule for Tier 1 covered buildings. It's split into 3 cohorts based on the size of the building, and it's staggered over 3 years. Building owners must comply with the dates outlined here, and then every 5 years thereafter. So buildings over 220,000 square feet have a compliance deadline of June 1st, 2026. Buildings between 90,000 and 220,000 square feet have a deadline of June 1st, 2027, and then buildings between 50,000 and 90,000 square feet have a deadline of June 1st, 2028. Next slide. So this slide is an overview of the basic Tier 1 requirements for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. So in order to comply with the standard, a Tier 1 building owner must benchmark the building's energy use, develop an energy management plan for the building, implement an operations and maintenance program, and then comply with an energy performance metric. And that's either through meeting the energy use intensity target for the building or pursuing compliance through the investment criteria. Okay, so the first item outlined here in the previous slide was benchmarking. So what is benchmarking? For purposes of the Clean Building Standard, benchmarking serves as a mechanism to measure energy performance over time relative to other similar buildings, and then compare that EUI calculation to a target. So how do we do it? We utilize Energy Star's Portfolio Manager, which is the industry standard for building energy benchmarking. It's free and it links directly with our Clean Buildings portal for reporting purposes when it comes time for that. So we use Energy Star other building owners use Energy Star to track their building energy use, and it calculates their energy use intensity and their weather normalized energy use intensity for compliance with the standard. Benchmarking really just gives building owners a baseline for which to gauge their building's energy efficiency compared to the established EUI targets in the standard, and then it helps just in determining the best approach to compliance as they pursue compliance with clean buildings. Next slide. So the next component, as mentioned in the slide a couple back, is the developing an energy management plan and implementing the operations and maintenance program requirements for your building. So the energy management plan should really identify performance and energy efficiency goals for a building, and then bundle those goals in a living report that's available to the building owner, operations staff, occupants, and tenants of the building. This is a living document that changes as the building and its systems change, and it's used to report just energy efficiency over time and then tracking in compliance with the standard itself. The operations and maintenance program is a component of the energy management plan and is also a living document that inventories building systems, establishes performance objectives, and tracks inspections, maintenance tasks for all the systems within the building, and just really creates that consistency in building operation for staff. A lot of buildings, existing buildings, have some form of operations and maintenance program in place. So when reporting for compliance with the standard, it's just making sure some of those existing programs just are in line with the requirements as they're outlined in Section 6 and normative Annex L of the standard. Okay, next slide. Okay, so once we have benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance program, we need to figure out how to comply with the performance metric component of the standard. This is just a flow chart that kind of walks through that decision making process. First and foremost, just looking to see if a building may be exempt from the standard. That would be an approach to complying through exemption. If not, then pursuing compliance either through meeting the energy use intensity target or through the alternative compliance pathway known as the investment criteria. All right, next slide. So as shown in the compliance workflow, a building owner, if they determine they are eligible for an exemption, exemptions are outlined in Section Z4.1 of the standard. They can submit a Form H, application for exemption, and these exemptions are in place, for a handful of reasons. But one is no certificate of occupancy. So if you have a newer building that it doesn't have a certificate of occupancy and cannot track 12 consecutive months of energy use prior to that compliance deadline, they could seek an exemption for the current compliance cycle. Buildings that have at least 50% of the conditioned floor area as unoccupied can apply for an exemption. And this really, it doesn't refer to occupant density. This really means that the space, that more than 50% of the floor area is not leased or is otherwise vacant. Buildings that have less than 50,000 square feet of conditioned space can apply for an exemption. We have instances where warehouse may utilize frost protection, but don't fall under that conditioned space category. So it really reduces the overall square footage of the building itself, putting them under that threshold. Buildings with manufacturing or industrial facilities that occupy more than 50% of the floor area can also apply for an exemption, and those are designated as Factory Group F or High Hazard Group H by the Washington State edition of the International Building Code. We've got exemptions for agricultural structures, buildings that are pending demolition, and then there are exemptions for financial hardship. So the application time frame for exemptions, so they can be submitted up to 3 years prior to a compliance deadline, and then no later than 180 days prior to the compliance date. And then exemption certificates, if approved, are valid for the current compliance cycle only. So each compliance cycle, that building owner would need to reapply for those exemptions. Next slide. Okay, so if the building doesn't qualify for an exemption from the standard, they'll need to meet one of the performance metrics. The first option would be meeting the performance metric of the energy use intensity target for the building. So benchmarking a building's energy use will identify where the building's at so they can look at EUI compared to the target. If at or below the target, no improvements would be needed for that building. So the building owner would just have to develop that energy management plan, the operations and maintenance program, and would be able to then submit for compliance with the standard. If the building's above that EUI target, building owners would need to perform an energy audit on the building and then implement energy efficiency measures to get them at or below the target. They'd need to perform measurement and verification, so then you would need 12 months of building energy use post-implementation to verify that you're at or below that target. We'll be hosting another workshop in the coming future. I'm not sure on the actual date, specific to meeting the EUI target. So more to come on that. Next slide. So the alternative compliance pathway is the investment criteria. So this will be the second option for the performance metric. The graphic represents just the procedural flow for the investment criteria pathway. So that process really just looks like conducting an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit on the building, which would identify energy efficiency measures for the property. That building owner would need to implement all cost-effective measures that were identified through that level 2 audit. And those cost effectiveness or that economic analysis must be done through Form F, which is the life cycle cost analysis tool for the standard. Once that optimized bundle of cost effective measures is identified, all cost effective measures would need to be implemented in the building. And then the savings would need to be verified through measurement and verification with 12 consecutive months of energy use data post-implementation. And the building would either need to hit or exceed 75% of the predicted savings from that energy audit to come into compliance. Next slide. I mentioned this was an alternative compliance pathway. There are certain buildings that would likely need to comply using the investment criteria. For example, buildings that are just unable to calculate an EUI in accordance with section 5.2 of the standard. So if it's just metered incorrectly to get building-centric energy use data, they could pursue compliance with the investment criteria. Buildings that don't have an energy use intensity target listed in table 7.2 would need to pursue compliance to the investment criteria, or spaces within buildings may need to comply to the investment criteria pathway as well. Or just buildings where it's just not feasible to meet the target, right? If it's just not cost effective to implement X number of measures to get you to that target, building owners could choose to pursue compliance through this performance metric. Next slide. All right. So tier 1 compliance pathways, and this is just kind of an outline of the forms that are required based on the compliance pathways selected, right? So that we have exemption, which is our Form H, which really is incorporated into the portal and just requires a couple pieces of supporting documentation to kind of confirm that exemption status. Meeting the energy use intensity target. Form A, which is our building details, Form B, which is the energy use intensity target calculation, and Form C, which is our energy use data and EUI calculations. Those 3 forms are built into the portal as well. Then they would include operations and maintenance program, energy management plan, and the O&M and EMP reporting tools. So then the investment criteria is a little bit different. It still includes forms A, B, and C, but then you see Form D and Form F. So Form D is the energy audit template. That's through DOE's Energy Audit Asset Score tool. And then Form F is the life cycle cost analysis tool that I mentioned earlier. And then both of those compliance pathways would require the O&M and EMP attachments as well. Next slide, please. All right, so should compliance date come and go, and building owners that do not have or that have not successfully submitted for compliance will receive a first notice from Commerce, which is called an NOVC, or Notice of Violation and Opportunity to Correct. If we don't receive a response within the specified time period, a second notice, or the NOVI, which is a Notice of Violation and Intent to Assess Administrative Penalties, will be submitted to the building owner, notifying that they'll be subject to penalties. So each notice will outline specifics on the section of law, code, or standard for which the building owner has failed to demonstrate compliance. And it'll provide a time by which the building owner must cure the violation by submitting supporting documentation. Maximum penalties, should it come to that, would be $5,000 base fee plus $1.50 per square foot of the building's GFA. So that would be the maximum penalty. There could be reduced penalties based on the time it takes to get into compliance as well. Okay, one last slide here on Tier 1. So this is just, I wanted to put in an example timeline to just kind of visualize and depict, like, that this compliance process takes a long time, right? Lots of lead time to get into compliance. So really just reiterating the fact that building owners really need to get going. This one here is an example for buildings over 220,000 square feet with a compliance deadline of June 1st, 2026. As you can see, getting started a 2-3 years before that compliance deadline is pretty important, especially if you don't already meet that target. Okay, next slide. So I'm just going to touch on the early adopter incentive program for Tier 1. Next slide, please. The purpose of this program is to encourage early adoption of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard for Tier 1 buildings prior to mandatory compliance deadlines. So currently the incentive is at 85 cents per square foot of gross floor area for meeting the building's energy use intensity target. And it's to be paid to building owners by their utility provider or providers. So the legislature authorized $75 million for this program. The funding sources for this program comes from public utility taxes. The application reporting requirements for the program are located on the Clean Buildings Incentive Program webpage, where you'll find the guidebook for the early adopter incentive program. By completing the program, buildings can meet early compliance and receive funds for their energy efficiency work. So the window for applying to the program ends 1 year prior to the appropriate compliance deadline. It's important to know this incentive can be administered in addition to utility conservation incentives, rebates, energy grants, or efficiency financing. Next slide. To be eligible for the early adopter incentive program, must have, for the Tier 1 version, must have a Tier 1 building over 50,000 square feet. The building must have a baseline weather normalized energy use intensity that exceeds its target by at least 15 UI. And the building must have at least one electric utility, gas, or thermal energy company associated with the building that's participating in the incentive program. And then to receive funding, the building must comply with the standard by meeting the energy use intensity target. Next slide. So this is just kind of a timeline for the early adopter incentive program. Commerce reviews and approves incentive applications, then calculates the incentive within 30 days. Utility providing services to the building approves the estimated incentive amount. And then the building has 18 months to complete construction and reports to Commerce when construction is complete. Sign-up requests can be made for additional time, up to 12 additional months if needed. And then following construction, the building has 18 months for measurement and verification to gather 12 consecutive calendar months of usage data to verify that that building meets the energy use intensity target. And then after verification, Commerce will notify the utility, and then the utility will issue payment within 30 days. Okay, one second. All right. There's a lot of slides, a lot of information real quick. Thanks for bearing with me. Hopefully that was just a review for most folks. We will have an opportunity for Q&A after this next section. So appreciate, again, appreciate y'all being here. So what's new? We are going to look at kind of some of the changes that have come about specific to Tier 1 that were made through the Tier 2 rulemaking process. At that time, we had the ability to sort of make modifications to Tier 1 rules and language just to clean things up, to make things easier, based on feedback from folks complying with the standard, et cetera. Next slide. So these are updated in new terms that were added through that rulemaking process. So newer terms are connected buildings, campus level compliance. We've added some definitions just for clarity, added definition for benchmarking, for physical occupancy, and then because the legislation expanded the standard to Tier 2, we've added Tier 1 covered buildings, Tier 2 covered building definitions. Some updated terms, qualified person requirements, credentials and requirements, and the qualified energy auditor credentials requirements. We've tweaked them. They're more or less the same. We've just sort of clarified things and cleaned things up there. Updated term, covered commercial building has been changed to just covered buildings. And then we've revised the definition for semi-heated space to align with the Washington State Energy Code. So the orange terms here, we're going to cover in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. Next slide. So connected buildings. This is one of the bigger changes we made. It was really developed as a compliance option for buildings pursuing compliance through meeting the energy use intensity target. And it can accommodate both Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings. But it's defined as a collection of buildings with shared energy meters on contiguous property. So we understand that there are a lot of connected building situations out there, rather than building owners needing to invest in sub-metering to kind of isolate that Tier 1 building. We've provided this allowance to accommodate buildings that share those metering to comply kind of as an aggregated whole connected building, if you will. So in this scenario here, we've got a energy meter distributed to 3 buildings. Building A here is a Tier 1 building. Building B is a Tier 2, and Building C is not covered. If pursuing compliance to connected buildings, you would need to comply as an aggregated total. The compliance deadline would be determined by the largest building. So in this case, at 80,000 square feet, the green building would determine the compliance date for the connected buildings, and that would be 2028. So the gross total square footage of the connected buildings is 135,000 square feet. This doesn't move the compliance requirements up to 2026, but then you would use the total square footage of the building to calculate the EUI, and then you would develop an area weighted target. So based on the EUIs developed building by building, they would have an area weighted or a ratio of the overall aggregated square footage. And this is just an example here. You can see EUI targets by building, and then that averaged or area weighted EUI target for the connected buildings together. Compliance can be graduated for connected buildings. You essentially become a conditional compliance situation where, if you had a building that had an earlier compliance date, or like a Tier 2 building, you could implement Tier 2 requirements, energy management planning, operations and maintenance, and benchmarking by that deadline, and then come into full compliance by the required deadline for the largest building. Okay, clear as mud. All right, next slide, please. So the next slide, we added this term campus level compliance also for Tier 1 buildings pursuing compliance through meeting the energy use intensity target. So building activity types, this is building activity types specific to K through 12, college, universities, prison, incarceration, and hospitals. These building activity types were developed at more of a campus level. So as an alternative to complying at the building level, these covered buildings may comply at a campus level through that EUIT performance metric. So it's an alternative reporting pathway for a collection of all the buildings on adjoining property with a single shared primary function that act as a single property. So this is, we understand that, these 4 building activity types often have multiple buildings that all serve that same primary function. They all work together. If you were to take one away, it would affect the overall functionality of that campus. Yeah. So because those targets were developed using source data that kind of accommodated this campus level UI, then we developed targets to also allow for compliance at that campus level. Again, it's an area weighted UI target for a campus. Typically in these situations, a majority of the buildings will fall under just the one target. In this case, as an example, college university with a UIT of 102. However, there are instances when a building on a college campus may not exactly fit within that definition. So it might have its own EUIT, and then in that case, you develop an area weighted average again. So here, this building in yellow with the GFA of 150,000 square feet has an EUI target of 215. You can see in the calculation over here that changes the overall campus target to 138. Okay. Next slide. All right, as mentioned earlier, the definitions for qualified person and qualified energy auditor were modified slightly. This is the qualified person definition. Anything in orange is another future update that's happening through rulemaking for 1390. So you won't see these changes quite yet in the recent integrated document, but they are coming. It doesn't change the actual qualifications for these roles, but it just kind of cleans things up. So the building operator certification level 2, Northwest Energy Efficiency Council changed their name to Building Potential, so we made that change. And then the number 5 and 6 here, Certified Energy Manager and Energy Management Professional, we moved those certifications under the Qualified Energy Auditor. And you'll see here under number 4 that a qualified energy auditor can qualify as a qualified person. Next slide. So definition for qualified energy auditor here, just showing that the CEM and the EMP certifications have moved over into this definition. And then we just put notes too that's just giving Commerce the authority to grant allowances for certifications or trainings that kind of meet those qualified or minimum qualifications of a qualified energy auditor that may be outside this specific list. Okay. So next, through rulemaking for Tier 2 buildings, Commerce developed Table 7.4, which was just put in place to provide more clarity for the qualified person and qualified energy manager who's responsible for developing the energy use intensity targets. Before, we would reference Energy Star Portfolio Manager definitions for the building activity types. In order to just kind of clean that up and put it more under our purview, we put those definitions within the standard now. So there's a new table in the new integrated document. Next slide. There was a change for exemptions with it for Tier 1 buildings. Commerce filed an emergency rule effective February 15th of 2023. The emergency rule stated that the applications for exemptions may be submitted to Commerce no sooner than 3 years prior to the compliance date and no later than 180 days prior to the compliance date. So this moved The original rules were 365 days prior to the compliance date and 180 days. We just gave more time to submit exemption applications for folks. Okay, next. So this slide we added just for clarification when developing the energy use intensity or tracking the net energy use of a building, we provided end use deductions that are allowed within the standard. So we're sub-metered EV charging and broadcast antennas, cell towers that are unrelated to the primary purpose of a building's function may be removed from the EUI calculations for the building. So here's the language under 5212 that was added to the integrated document. So Annex Z amendments, which are the administrative procedures for Tier 1 buildings. So these were reviewed and modified to add clarity and provide additional compliance flexibility that we found as like pain points for stakeholders. These were integrated to provide some compliance flexibility while still maintaining the intent of the standard itself. So addressed responsibility where there's a change in ownership. So just clarifying that new owners are still responsible for compliance with the standard. We modified data points in Form A to better track compliance for buildings in more unique situations, such as those pursuing compliance through conditional compliance or buildings that are unable to calculate their EUIs in accordance with Section 5.2. We clarified how to categorize climate zones. There are 4 climate zones in our state. However, the targets only utilize 2 of those climate zones. So we just clarified if you fall on one of those kind of the 2 smaller climate zones, that how to classify the buildings when calculating the UIT. And then added Form F, just noting that for clarity within Z6.5.3. And then in the footnotes of the tables in Annex Z, we added one just to clarify that the building activity types are defined by the AHJ, which is Department of Commerce. And then we added footnotes 8 and 9. Footnote 8 is for laboratories, and campus level is footnote number 9. Basically saying in footnote 8 that buildings like a campus level building, such as a college university that has a energy intensive laboratory dedicated to research, may utilize the laboratory target rather than just utilizing the college university target for that situation. Next slide. All right, some of the proposals we prepared, or not proposals, some of the changes we've done were intended just to add clarity to the existing rules and to provide just a little more flexibility and compliance and just general cleanup, right? So we added a section here, measurement verification subsection for buildings that have energy monitoring, where that wasn't there before. We provided an exception in the energy management plan specific to the requirement for lighting schedules and lighting satisfaction surveys. So buildings that meet their EUR target can now do not have to complete those 2 requirements. Additionally, a building that has implemented a utility program lighting upgrade that covers at least 75% of the building's floor area in the last 5 years can utilize the documentation from that utility lighting upgrade for compliance purposes. And then the energy audit timeline, we extended from 3 years to 5 years. So if there's been an energy audit conducted on a building within the last 5 years, now it can still be applied for purposes of compliance with the standard. It just better aligns with the 5-year compliance cycle. So, next cycle, we could still utilize an applicable energy audit if needed. And then we had just general formatting, titles, and grammar corrections. This is just a screenshot kind of illustrating that. We added titles in places which can help to navigate through the standard. We've corrected some language, and then we've just cleaned up inconsistencies that we found. For example, WNUI in certain cases was written out as weather normalized energy utilization index. we've changed all those just for consistency to weather normalized energy use intensity. Next slide. Okay. So incentive program updates. Commerce proposed legislation to increase the amount to shoulder more of the cost and make it more appealing to applicants to apply for compliance with meeting their EUIT. So earlier this year, House Bill 1976 passed, which gave Commerce the authority to increase the incentive amounts for Tier 1 buildings from the current 85 cents. So the incentive program is working to develop the updated program guidelines and determine what that increased funding will look like. We don't have that increase amount currently, but it should be coming out soon. Energy audit incentives for public buildings. We received $20 million from the Climate Commitment Account and proviso funding from Senate Bill 5187. This funding will cover part or all of the audit costs for an ASHRAE Level 2 audit for publicly owned buildings at a rate of 50 cents per square foot. And it's important to note that if you've already done a Level 2 audit on your building, we still encourage you to apply if it was completed on or after July 1st, 2023, as this program is retroactive. And then that funding ends June 20th of 2025. Okay, that was a lot of information. Appreciate you tagging along for it. Do we have questions? We can start answering.
Yes, and I was typing. So let's start at the top where, let's see, what is the difference in requirements between investment pathway with and without the EUI?
Yeah, so if you don't have a measurable EUI, benchmarking wouldn't be required. And then you can still determine cost-effective energy efficiency improvements at the building level. Just the measurement and verification process will be a little bit different because you can't show that actual reduction in EUI for the building. We can use the measurement. I blank on the term. I apologize. Judy, do you have it?
The term. I don't know what term you're looking.
The protocols MVP, IP MVP. Thank you, Doug. There it is. Yes, it's outlined within the standard. So if you do not have a measurable EUI, it's basically a retro commissioning process that to commission the implementation of energy efficiency measures.
You ready for the next question?
Yep.
Is it realistic that the federal guidelines for a campus make state ESPM profiles contradict, and the best practice being 2 separate ESPM accounts for sites looking to use ESPM for marketing with EPA stickers?
Okay. Yeah, so
I didn't know how to answer that, so.
Yeah, so the campus reporting and portfolio manager creating a parent-child property relationship. Yeah, there's a few options within the Clean Building Standard where you may need to utilize a parent property. Some of those that we talked on were the connected buildings, campus level compliance, and then campuses, going forward with House Bill 1390 and decarbonization of district energy systems. So there's going to be a few options there for reporting at a campus level. I don't know, based on the requirements for EPA or other reporting standards, what that'll look like. I do know that, campus, I think, as portfolio manager defines, are those handful of properties that can qualify for an Energy Star score. And I think it's similar to our campus level, but might be slightly different. I can't answer. Yeah.
Is that, sorry. Yeah. So I asked that because I dealt with this for one of our hospital clients, and it got really weird because they wanted like a building 2 blocks away because it was owned by the same client to be included as the campus. And then when you read the EPA's stuff, if you have like a floor that's a cafeteria, but the majority of the building's a hospital, they want that to just be labeled as a hospital use type.
Okay.
And so seeing how the EUI targets develop based on square footages,
Yep.
it gets weird. And then separately, the EPA changed their wording on owned and operated.
Okay.
So it used to be that it had to be owned and operated to be part of a campus. And now they're saying if it's owned, just owned by an entity, if you outsource your O&M to a different company for some parts of adjacent buildings, they would still want that as part of the campus. It's interesting because some of these healthcare buildings, there's multiple property owners that own the campus buildings. And so if you share resources between them, it gets convoluted. And it looks like the state is trying to get more granular on like use targets, and the EPA's guidelines seem more lax because the parent-child thing too, the EPA stuff talks about like using the predominant use type, not breaking it out for each space. And you start to lose the ability to get a rating from the Energy Star if you don't meet the 50 or 75% square foot use details.
And that's probably fine to still do within Portfolio Manager because the targets are developed outside of it for the Clean Building Standard.
I get you. There's not an Energy Star score for the Clean Building Standard. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, could reach out offline if you have specific scenarios you want to talk through. Happy to work with you on those.
Okay.
Kind of reports.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's helpful. We're trying to, where we can, align because we've got other benchmarking requirements, right, for the state. Also, Seattle's, and they follow more of the EPA guidelines a little bit closer. So we're trying to accommodate for that and kind of make some of these changes outside of Portfolio Manager as much as we can. So that's some future development that's coming down the road, but more to come on that. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate taking the question.
Okay, the next one I answered, but I wanted to just state it here because it was asked a couple times. Is the campus level an option, or is that the way you want us to look at buildings? And I answered the campus level is an option for hospitals, K-12, colleges, universities, and prisons to reduce the need for sub-metering. But the standard was intended to do at a building level, so that's ideal, but this is an option for those building activity types.
I mean,
that need for
and I would add to that, for K-12 and college, university, there's really not, it comes back to, there's not really a great target for those classrooms only. So really the target in the definition kind of lays it out, but it sort of includes all these various buildings that might be on a typical campus, if you will.
Right.
So yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Thanks.
So Annette's question is next, and she's asking, can you please confirm that the language requires a WNEUI to be below the EUIT, not just the EUI, so that if WNEUI is greater than EUI, then the WNEUI is the metric to use. And the language she's referring to is 4. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say yes. WNEUI, weather normalized EUI, is the metric used to show compliance with the standard, if pursuing compliance to meeting that target.
Okay.
Question on that: weather normalized would be based on Energy Star's normalization.
Yes. So yeah, the EUI, WNEUI is calculated through Energy Star. The targets are calculated outside of Energy Star, and those do account for the 2 climate zones in the state.
But the weather normalized, if you have different use types to comply with getting an Energy Star scoring. Anyways, I don't know how that weather normalized algorithm works, but I would assume that, a hospital versus a medical office building would have different weather normalization.
Yeah, I don't know what I know they utilize whatever the local weather station is for that location of the building to normalize the EUI based on the weather, but I don't know how it.
Because 8 air changes of fresh air versus, a standard office building going to have different weather impacts.
Yeah, I don't know that comes into play with the weather normalized calculation, but I'm not certain.
Okay. I apologize. Some people have asked new questions in replies to the other questions. So if I miss your question, I apologize. Here's one. What about buildings changing use types at the time of compliance? And I'm not sure like what that was referring to, what you were saying, Donnie, at the time.
Yeah, it's a good question. I know this one's come up in the past if building modifications have happened, and you don't have time to calculate 12 months of energy use data with the new building activity types. That's a good one. I think we need to maybe look at a specific situation offline and then, or, and then kind of talk through that one. I don't know, Judy, if you have any historical knowledge on that from past questions.
Well, yeah, so there's the exemption where you haven't been physically occupied for the time that you need to benchmark because of the timing of it all, and it can get complicated. So it might be best to talk about the specific property to figure out the best way to proceed.
Yeah,
don't you think, Donnie?
I think so, yeah.
This one as well, maybe regarding complexes. If buildings are connected in an enclosed walkway but metered separately, can the buildings comply separately at a building level, or are they required to comply as a complex?
It's a good question. My understanding is complex would be essentially one building, as long as it's on the continuous property, and continuous property is defined under sole ownership. So if both buildings are owned by the same entity and then they are interconnected through conditioned space, I think they would need to comply as a complex.
And you didn't really say about the enclosed walkway, whether it was
conditioned or not.
Connected or closed off, thermally isolated. Moving on, retail connected with condos, are they reported as a whole complex, or who does the reporting?
Condos are a little different, so that's residential. Individual condo units are not required to comply, but they would fall under tier 2 of the standard. So if there is common space for a condo building that exceeds 20,000 square feet, they would need to benchmark the building energy use for that shared common space, and then develop an energy management plan and operations and maintenance program. And then the retail space. What's that? Go ahead.
Go. That's what I was going to say. And this is the retail connected to those condos. It would be the homeowner or the owner of the retail space who would be required
the building,
to do reporting.
The building owner who's paying the property taxes.
Yeah, the building owner is responsible for compliance.
The retail.
So if the building owner in the retail space exceeds 50,000 square feet, they would need to comply with tier 1. If the condo space if it was under the same ownership, or if the condo association owned that space, that would kind of separate ownership, and then the condo units may need to comply with tier 2 if that common space is greater than 20,000 square feet.
Regarding the incentives, is that retroactive incentive for audits initiated after July 1, 2023 or completed after July 1, 2023?
That's a great question. I'm not positive. You need to reach out directly to the incentive program to get more clarification on that one.
You can send an email to our buildings inbox.
Or building, yeah, there you go.
And we'll forward it to the appropriate person.
Yeah.
We're almost at time. I just wanted to you guys to be mindful of that. We're at 3 minutes till. Maybe take one more.
Yeah, one more question.
Did you say that colleges may now use laboratory EUIT for science building labs?
Yeah, so if you refer to the footnote in table 7.2a, it lays that out. So a laboratory at a research university, it's not, it's designed for more high energy intensive scientific studies, experiments where they have controlled indoor environments. Those sorts of laboratories can utilize that laboratory target. Other laboratory spaces, they may be like life sciences for teaching, that sort of thing. Those would likely still fall under that college university target. But the qualified person is the one that needs to make that determination.
Then for the remaining questions,
I think,
we'll
Judy, what
circle
we're
back
going to do
around.
for the remaining questions, I'll put them in a document and we'll get them answered. And
Perfect.
we will email the registrants so they'll have something to reference on that.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You'll also receive an email afterwards with the link to the recording, the slide deck, and those question and answers. So it might take us a minute to get these questions answered. So be patient with us. You'll get it soon enough, probably the end of next week. For the remaining time, I just want to give you some information. Just, this highlights kind of the general things that we've been doing for outreach education for tier 1 and 2. And then just the no-cost support available to you. We have the Clean Buildings team. Reach out to your utility providers. There's accelerator programs for that's provided free of charge to utility customers. So check with your major utility providers. Energy Star helps with benchmarking. And then you have Rebecca from the Smart Building Center that manages a help desk that can help you through some complex situation. And then we have a training series. So tomorrow we'll be covering tier 2. We hope you could join us. And then following that, we'll have meeting the EUIT, the investment criteria, life cycle cost analysis. And if you are wondering about district energy systems, we should have the rules codified by July. So we hope you could join us then. And I just want to say thank you again for joining us. We appreciate your time and attention. I hope you have a great day.